All right, well, let's get started then. Today we're doing reporting and exporting your data. Before we really get started, are there any questions about what we've done in the workshop so far, last week or any of the weeks before?
I'd be interested in receiving your notes from each of the sessions if you happen to have those available for us all.
Sure, I can send those all out.
Fabulous.
Okay then. Today we are doing reporting and exporting because, of course, all these weeks we've been learning how to create questions and do the survey flow and the workflows and everything else, and it's all for the express purpose of getting your data in the first place. And so I just have a very simple, I pulled this in, survey. The exact questions are not really important at this point because we're just doing the data part. And as I mentioned a couple of times, there's always the generate test responses. That's what I've done earlier so that we already have this done and we can get right into things. But I want to mention that, I've told you before you actually administer your survey to go in and delete whatever test responses you have. One thing about having that this data and these test responses is, depending on what you're doing, you might want to download them. Because then if you need to write SPSS or state or R programs or Excel spreadsheets or whatever to analyze and report your data, you can use all this test data to develop those programs. The SPSS script or the SAS program, whatever you're using, while your main survey is being administered. That way, when you've collected all of your real data, you already have all the programming done. And all you need to do is just switch one line in the program pointing to the data file. And it's just a way of, just getting things moving along without having to wait until you have all your real data to start doing those kinds of things. So as I said, I created some dummy data, and this is, you can see this is from a while. It's all the same stuff. And of course, there's data and analysis, results, and reports, and we're going to go through all of these today. But the default when you first come in is what they call the data table. You can do, I've mentioned a few times, some really kind of basic text analysis with Text IQ, and there's a lot of setup you have to do before you get to this point. And as you say, an update will occur and could take 48 hours. So I'm not going to do that right now because we don't have 48 hours. But as I say, if you're doing real, honest to goodness text analysis, then you need to download your data and bring it into something like Atlas TI or NVivo or any number of other actual text analysis programs. The Text IQ is good if you're looking for certain phrases or words in the open-ended responses to see if your respondents are using those phrases, and then you can alert yourself or somebody else. You know, it's especially good for crisis intervention, perhaps. You know, or if you're doing some kind of customer satisfaction and somebody says, oh, I really hated that, well, then you can immediately respond to them. You can do some pretty nice crosstabs as well. And, you know, yeah, okay. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip this. And it's, you know, you can see there's this nice crosstab, and all you have to do is move your variables over to the rows or columns, however you like to do it. The cells, you can decide what you want in the cells. There's a whole bunch of things, and then depending on your data, some of these other settings might be available to you. That's one good thing about Qualtrics, is if something isn't appropriate or can be used with that particular type of variable or question, it won't give you that option. And, you know, it's your standard crosstab table. You can export it, you know, the current table, all crosstabs. You can do more than one crosstab in this table or page, whatever you want to call it. And there's settings, analysis, and, you know, what you want your confidence levels, and how many decimal places you want. You know, pretty simple. With just about all of these, you can also add a filter, and that does what it says. You know, if duration is greater than or equal to, I'm just going to put in 20 because I don't know what it might end up being. And you see it's running the calculation. And of course, we can take the filter out and it goes right back. So it's nice. You can play around with it a little bit and see what works well. You can also do weighting in Qualtrics. I would not recommend doing that. If you've never done any kind of weighting before, then it's really not something I would recommend getting into. If you are doing a sample survey and you need to apply weights, I would strongly suggest finding a statistician who has experience with creating and applying weights. That way you make sure that it's being done properly and exactly the way it should be done. Now, this video editor thing is like brand new. To be honest, I found out about it today when I was prepping and going through this, and that's typical for Qualtrics. Is it has a new question type. Let's go back to the survey, where your respondents can respond via video. So you can ask them, you know, please, you know, record your consent here. They click on here and it starts recording. And this is like brand new, at least to me. I found this out today. I don't think we've seen it before, and, you know, all the times we've gone through the various question types. I looked, and you get up to 180 seconds for a response. So that's, what, 3 minutes. So it's not real long. It's long enough for, a real short answer, basically. And Qualtrics has been a little bit slow today, for whatever reason. Oh, please, come on. Well, you had all of them there a second ago. Of course, there is the video editor where you can edit, pare down some of those video responses if you're using them. Come on. Are you serious? Of course. And we can't even do anything else until this. I don't know why. Great.
Paul,
Yes.
while we're waiting for that, could you just remind me, was your plan to record each of these sessions and put them on answers?
No, not on answers. You can find them on my Qualtrics LibGuide.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. I don't have access to post things on answers. So I actually post all of these to YouTube and then link to them in my LibGuide.
Okay. Thank you.
Yay. Okay, where was I? All right. Yeah, with the main table here, you can also do a filter. And it's very much like many of the other things we've done. So if you want everybody who's done their consent or like survey metadata fields, their start date, anybody after a particular date or before a particular date, etc. I'm sure you've all heard of data filters. Over here, you see recorded responses versus responses in progress. That's exactly what it means. Of course, some people maybe in the middle, if it's a long survey and you're allowing them to come back to it, you'll see more here, responses in progress. As soon as somebody goes in and answers a question, it's considered in progress. So you'll be able to see how many have finished it because they've been recorded and how many are still working on it. This field editor can be useful, and it's really more useful for any of the dashboards and results and online reports we're going to look at. If you're not going to use either of these, the results, any of the online reports, then you are much better off creating new fields in SPSS or Excel or R, whatever you're going to use. And that's very much because if you realize maybe you made a mistake, you would then have to come back into Qualtrics and figure out how you created that field, recreate it, and then download all your data again. The other thing is you can download the fields that you create, but there's no documentation as to how you did it. So you can give it a new name and what type of field it is and click on Create Field. Bucketing is a way of just combining, it's like collapsing. Say you ask people their age and they put in, 52, 27, 39, whatever. And now you want to categorize that. So you want 18 to 20, and then 20 to 30, and 30 to 40, etc. The bucketing is just what they call it. You can also just create a formula where the new field is, different types of from your variables, so it would be X plus Y, whatever you're going to say Y is, and some of this, doesn't necessarily make sense. But again, as I say, this is good for when you're using the online reports. And you can combine, you can do concatenation, which means just taking two string fields and jamming them together. As I say, I don't know many people who use this, and and if you're only going to, if you're not going to do any online stuff, then it's not particularly useful. Are there any questions about that? You can do export, importing data. Let's go over the exporting a little bit. And we've seen some of this before, and as I say, always click on more options. You always want to download all the fields. And usually use choice text. If you're bringing it into Excel, it's like behind the scenes, if you're asking people, do you agree or disagree? Behind the scenes, it's numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, however many possible responses you have. But of course, your respondency, agree, somewhat agree, neutral, etc. And if you use the numeric values, then it will download those numbers. If you use the choice text, then it will download the text. And given that this is a CSV, which is another similar to Excel, usually you'll want the choice text. Otherwise, you're going to have to remember what 1 is and 2 is and everything else. Usually by default, compressed data as a .zip file is checked. I usually recommend unchecking that I've never seen anybody, at least at SU, who needs to compress the data file. That's for when the file is really, really big and it would take a long time to download as is. The zip just compresses it, makes it smaller and faster to download. But then, of course, once you download it, you have to unzip it, and it can get confusing. Use commas for decimals. That's just if you're American or European. Remove line breaks is if you have a large essay text box, sometimes people will hit return within those, and that can mess things up depending on what other program you bring your data in. By clicking this, it will remove all of those returns. Recode seen but unanswered questions as -99, and you can change that value. This is a holdover from the days of punch cards, when you could not have a column in that punch card that was not punched. It would confuse the computer, the data entry machine. And so if somebody didn't answer a question, they would often code it as -9 or -99 or -999, depending on how many, what the possible choices were, so that it would be obvious when they went through and cleaned the data that that was a missing value, and that they would have to do something else to deal with that. In SPSS, you can tell SPSS anything that's -99 treated as missing. Makes your life easy. Recode seen but unanswered multi-value fields as 0. This is for check all that apply types of questions. By default, Qualtrics will put a 1 for each response that the person checks and leave all the others blank. I often tell people, yeah, check this, because then you'll know the difference between a question that they skipped over entirely versus one where they did not choose a particular option. Export viewing order data for randomized surveys. We talked about this last week, the week before. We did randomizing in the survey flow. If you're doing that, then you definitely want to check this off to make sure that your randomization worked the way you wanted it to. Split multi-value fields into columns. This is, again, with the check all that apply. If you uncheck this, then that entire question, so you have like we've used before, what flavors of ice cream do you like best? And you give them a choice of 10 and they can check however many they want. With this unchecked, all of those values will be in one column, say in the Excel file, and you don't want that. I've never seen that being useful, so make sure that split multi-values is always checked. The rest of these you can pretty much leave unchecked. This is use internal IDs in header. That's like the first line of an Excel file, and the internal IDs is the internal code for each question, and it's a big long code that's not going to make any sense to you. None of them have ever made any sense to me, but it's the way Qualtrics works behind the scenes. Exclude survey response edits. Yeah, just leave that unchecked. And then include download links for user uploaded files. There is a file upload question so that people can, as the name implies, upload a file. Maybe it's an application for travel or something along those lines. This will include a link to that in the data file that gets downloaded. You'll always have that in the data table over here, but this will include it in the downloaded data as well. And TSV is very much, it's comma separated versus tab separated. You'll see, depending on what option file type you want, you'll get different options down here. So Excel looks a lot like the CSV and TSV. XML, I've not seen anybody use this, but I suppose there are some programs out there that want that. Most likely, you'll be using either SPSS or Excel. And again, download all the fields. String width, that's just an SPSS thing, depending on how big any of your text answers might be. If you have a really big essay thing, then you might want to change it. Otherwise, it gets cut off. But 99% of the time, the medium 2000 is just fine. Basically, all of the same, many of the same options that we've seen before. By default, this will just download a .sav file, which you can, if you have SPSS on your machine, you just double click and it opens right up in SPSS, which is wonderful. Sometimes, though, if you have to share your data because it's a requirement of your grant, or you have a newer version of SPSS than somebody you want to give your data to, you can download the syntax file and the raw data file and send them to your colleagues, your collaborators, or to whatever data repository you need to put your data in. You can also link to your Google Drive if you have one, and this will save it to a Google Sheets, which is Google's version of Excel. And you can see a lot of the same options there. And of course, as we mentioned, the user submitted files. You can download all of them all at once, and it comes, it is just a zip export, and it's all in one folder of all the files that are available. Any questions about those? That's probably what you're going to be using most of the time. Under Tools, you can have a new layout, and it's not letting me do that. You can change what columns you want. Check them or uncheck them as to what you want. You can also move them back and forth or change what column it is. And again, once you've done that, you can save the layout, and you can obviously have different layouts, so you can go back and forth if that's something you want to do. And of course, you have, it's not being very cooperative today. You can see, you know, this is like a regular data table. And if you come over here, you can view the response, delete it, retake it as a new response. What these actually do is they give you links. And I have a video that explains this a bit more. Is sometimes, depending on what you're doing, somebody might say, oh, I meant to say something else. Can I change my answer? And you can come here to their line in the data and send them a link to retake the response, to retake the survey. Retake response will replace or update any of the answers that they have already given. Retake as a new response will create a whole new record in the data. And you can export their responses to a PDF. If you do view response, I think may have taken a quick look at this very early on. You can go through and you'll see all the responses, what date that it was submitted on, and how long it took. This was a test response, so it didn't take anything. You can even page through all the different responses. This can be useful. And down at the bottom, there's any embedded data you might have included, and of course their location data. If this were a regular response, their IP address would also be in here, unless of course you've told it to not record any of that. And of course, you can come over here and click on a particular response. Now you get some more options over here. You can edit the response, you know, just editing any of the fields that you want or need to. This just is an undo for any of the edits. And you can delete the response. And if you do that, of course, it's going to ask you and make sure that you really want to do this. That's one of the nice things about Qualtrics, is they really make sure that you want to delete the data before you actually do delete the data. And if you want to delete the whole thing, of course, you come up here and it will check all of them. It says all 100 responses selected on this page. Select all 201. And so you can do that and then click delete, and it deletes all your data. Let's see. And, you know, you can page through down here. You can say how many, up to 100 responses per page, or 50 or 20, however you want. Any questions so far? Okay, let's look at the results page. There we go. And by default, it will create this nifty little report. With all of the questions, and it will look at what type of question and what type of data are there, and decide what might be the best visualization for it. You can change that. Over here, there are settings, and these settings if it shows up. Wow. There we go. As it says, edit your dashboard's appearance. And it's just the header and the background and whatnot. And this applies to the entire results report, results page. And it's, useful for basic kinds of information. Come up here, there's another, you can pin it to your home page. So if you really want to know these answers when you first come into Qualtrics, you can do that. You can view the data for this particular widget or visualization, chart, whatever you want to call it. And you have a couple of options to export it, whether JPEG, PDF, CSV, Excel. You can download the entire dashboard, or you can email it. You can schedule the emails and send it to whoever you like. We've seen these kinds of things. Attach the report, etc. And you can do it recurring. So that's weekly or monthly on whatever day and whatever time. That can be useful particularly if you have like an ongoing survey that just keeps a rolling survey, and you can email the results either to yourself or anybody else on a weekly basis to see how it's changed, how many new responses, etc. It's also good if you want to share the results with somebody, say at another institution, or somebody you don't want to make a collaborator, and giving them access to actually get into the Qualtrics thing. You can just send them the report. Okay, how do I get out of this? Great. There we go. And it's nice if you click on this little thing, it'll give you a description. Actually, do more than say yes. It's why it's taking forever today. Oh, great. Don't really want to exit the page. Ah, there we go. Finally. Wow. So you can see it gives you a little bit more information about the full question. Oh, good heavens. There we go. And you can edit the dashboard as well. This is going to be slow. Good grief. So you can go in and edit each, as Qualtrics calls it, a widget. And you can decide what metrics you want, whether it's count, where the data come from, any filters, comparisons, etc. So, you know, you can change it to sum. How you want to format it, whether it's etc., and any filters you want to put directly on here. As well as you know, pretty much just how it looks, whether you want grid lines or not, and various chart styles, whether it's stacked or horizontal. And then if you click up here, you can change what kind of visualization it is. You know, and of course, depending on what type of question you've asked, some of these would be more appropriate than others. You can duplicate it, remove it. You can even get code. So if you choose copy code, then you can plug that code into a web page, and it will show this widget on that web page. Click done editing. Any questions? No, it's a little weird because it's been so slow. And finally, reports. And these are a little more, give you a little more leeway, more options than the results page, the results dashboard does. And it will, by default, include all of your questions. If you click on here, you get various other options and things that you can do, what types of visualizations, custom color palette, if that's appropriate, that legend values, you know, all these kinds of things that you see in Excel and other programs that let you make charts. You can even add data from another survey. So you click here and you get all your other surveys. I'm just going to bring that in. Well, earlier today it worked just fine. Oh, there we go. And now select a field. I'm just going to say there. And so now you can see there's, do you consent to take this survey? And I agree to participate in this survey. And they're coming from two completely different surveys, but they're being displayed on the same graph next to each other. So that can be pretty convenient if you have related surveys, or if you have, you know, like a pre and post kind of thing. One thing though is if you do that, it's not matching each respondent's first and second responses. It's just taking it all together. So if you're doing a real repeated measures, you're going to need to download the data and match the two together. But this can be, you know, pretty nice if you like having these kinds of reports. And of course, there's styles. You know, it's the same kind of thing we looked at before. File, you can export it to QRF is Qualtrics' way of exporting reports like this, and then you can import it into another survey. Delete it, rename it, various settings for it. Change the locale and apply it as the default settings. I'm going to look at share in a second. Edit, copy, paste, remove, view, and then insert. You can insert new questions, text, you know, all this kind of editing types of things. To share your report, which is nice, you can either just download it as a PDF and then email it to somebody, or put a link to it on a web page, whatever you want to do. You can schedule an email like we did with the other, and it looks exactly the same. I want to close. There we go. Manage public report. This is what's pretty useful with this, is you can send this link to anyone you like, or you can even post it on a web page. And then anybody who has this link can see the report. So I'm just going to copy for a second. You can also put a passcode on it. It's the same for everybody. So, you know, like the other passcode we saw in survey authentication, it's not real useful as a passcode. So I'm going to go in here and I'll paste that link in. And you see it's a big long thing. And now anybody who has this link can see your report. What's nice about this is as new data come in, the report will update itself automatically. So whenever you come back to this, it will automatically update itself. You can change the size of it, and you can also download it as a PDF. And this is over here. It's the same thing as the share. Manage the report, download a PDF, You can preview the public report, and then settings for that we've already seen that apply to the entire report. And if you click in here, yeah, I showed you this. You get your various settings and styles and whatnot. Okay, are there any questions? I'm sorry for the delays in Qualtrics. I know that kind of makes it a little frustrating, but that's how life goes sometimes. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you for participating in our workshops over these last, 7 weeks. And as always, if you have any questions, you can shoot me an email, and I will do everything I can to help.
Thank you, Paul.
All right. Thank you. Take care, everyone.